Nice music. Welcome. At AMS-IX, security, resilience is chefsache. Everybody knows Peter, everybody knows AMS-IX, I hope, so no introductions. But Lieuwe-Jan, you're from Onto-it. What is Onto-it for company?
We are a managed security company in the cyberspace, so we in Europe and in the United States and Canada. So what we do is we manage firewalls. We do an MDR, have an MDR function. We have a security operations center 24/7, and we're very much focused on resilience and making sure that all these things that we just heard about do not happen. That's our goal. That's my personal goal, to make sure there's zero exfiltrations.
And how do you do that?
How much time do we have?
Half an hour?
Half an hour.
You have 2 minutes.
half a second, yeah.
Okay, good luck with that.
Cheers. Great seeing you today, yeah. Well, Zero Trust is probably the main thing I would summarize it with, which is, to me, a way to be resilient. Zero Trust, many of us know, and it means a lot to different things to different people these days, unfortunately. But to me, it's the way of thinking in a slightly different way about our space. Somehow, and apologies on behalf of our industry, we seem to think in terms of threat actors that we need to fend off somehow. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. What we should do is think of the assets that we have and make sure we protect those. It might seem the same thing because we're still deploying firewalls and deploying endpoint protection, all those countermeasures that we do. But making the shift in that mindset, make sure that you are actually preventing a system, or like whether this is a critical infrastructure network or a pump in a water company. I live below sea level, so I have some skin in the game here, of course. But we should think of those pumps, and they cannot be operated by the Chinese, for example. That's what we need to think about. I don't really care, in the end, whether it's China or Russia that is trying to attack us. So I don't. Of course, I need to understand how they're doing it. We need to make sure that all those tactics don't work. But in the end, I care about my data and about my systems. And that's our mission, I think, that we should
And is that the same philosophy we're using, Peter?
Yeah, but coming from a slightly different angle, right? So AMS-IX has been a vital infrastructure for quite some time now. And there was not a choice per se, right? So the Dutch government decided that AMS-IX was part of vital services. And on the one hand, I think, oh great, because it's a sort of a recognition of we're doing important stuff. But of course, last couple of years, it's much more about great, but how do you make sure your vital services work? Also in times of issues, whether they are, like we see today, geopolitical developments, or indeed whether it's flooding or something else, how do we make sure they work? So yes, I think, we have a similar view, but we're also going through that same journey. That security initially was about how do we keep the bad guys out, and more we're sitting, also because we're being asked by the Dutch government, being part of vital services, how do you ensure that your service is up? Not only during normal operation, but also if something happens, how do you make sure you can still offer that service? So yeah, we are on a similar trajectory, I would say, although with a slightly different focus. For Onto-it, the security is their business. For us, it's something we have to do to keep the platform going and keep it safe. But like I said in my opening, more and more you'll see that we'll share that with our customers, either in knowledge or in services we will offer to our partners.
Yeah, we even started a joint hobby, right?
Yeah.
The Threat Talks, where
Exactly,
we talk about this every week.
Did you make a conscious choice to make it chefsache at AMS-IX, or was it accidental?
So I think it depends a little bit on the chef, maybe. So I have a history in security. So during my career, I've spent a lot of time selling, advising, implementing security solutions. So it was sort of a natural thing when I joined a couple of years ago. Then again, here we go again. It's somebody's. But it was also part of very operational almost. So internally, we're ISO certified, and originally that was organized within the technical team. And I felt nothing on towards the technical team, but I felt it was more a technical thing than it was actually about how do we protect our assets, how do we make sure we keep the company and the service safe. So it was a conscious decision to say, let's not make it just a technical thing, let's make it Chefsache and make sure that we keep our assets safe. And that includes our people, right? We have people traveling the world to sometimes difficult places. How do we keep our people safe? And not just the data and the equipment, but also our people. So yes, it was a conscious decision to pull it under me as CEO.
Lieuwe-Jan, if you look at your customer base, is it normal to have the CEO do this? Or is it very often the system administrators doing this?
It's getting better, but I think everybody could take an example in how AMS-IX makes security in its core. Maybe due to the nature of AMS-IX being such a vital part of society, but often cybersecurity is bolt on. Especially in industry, in e-commerce. Now we get the compliance guys or the security guys that get in and then introduce their disruptive firewalls that are latency introducing devices, etc. We see that too often. It's getting better. The discussion at least is now at board level. So I think that's good. Oh, I have a technical issue of my own.
But that's also due to NIS2. Regulation that basically places
regulation helps.
Yeah.
The regulation helps a lot, at least to put it on the agenda, and so that the boards understand. Oh, this is really something that I need to care about, and I may even personally be liable for things if things go south. And I think that's a very good effect of it.
And you see, you have technical, you have organizational, but also human employee security. Is that something you see as something big, or?
You mean in keeping people safe while traveling, for example, that example? Or
both, but also how they use the equipment?
Yeah, I think research is still showing that the weakest link in security often is the user, right? The interface between the screen and the keyboard, as we tend to say. And that includes all of us, right? And it includes how we update our passwords, or also internally. Sometimes I really need to chase people to do awareness training, for example, and etc. So yes, it includes absolutely the people element. And I think more and more we really need to realize that to some extent you could say it is an arms race, because also the bad guys are getting better and better at it, right? And even though it is Chefsache, and even though I'm working on it every day, I also have had one or two occasions where I just caught it, right? Like, darn, I'm falling into this rabbit hole, and I've almost clicked on a link or something where you only at the last moment realize. So it's getting so sophisticated and so much part of everyday life, all of us being busy, trying to multitask, and again, humans inherently being bad at that. So yeah, the human factor is definitely a part in that. The good thing is that, of course, also the solutions are getting better in helping the humans deal with it. But we cannot argue that if we look at the complexity of the technology, it is almost impossible for the user to be on your own and do that, right? So we have to really take care of that.
So, yeah, if I may add to this, suppose you are a CISO and you have 2,000 people in your organization, and your responsible is to make sure they don't click on links that they shouldn't click on. You've already lost that battle, right? So user training it helps a bit, but honestly, I think that us as a technology industry should make sure that it doesn't matter whether you click on a link. We have to do tests in our own organization. I can share that 52% of people in our organization clicked on those links. Now, I have to give some kudos to the guy who designed it, because it was really well done, of course, because they make it their pride and to lure their colleagues in. But that tells you, and we are a really security-aware company, of course. So, no harm done, because there wasn't any problem, because our authentication is properly done. We have proper anti-malware and all that. And I think that is the key thing that we should focus on. So we shouldn't say, okay, because users are always involved and there's always a password that's being leaked in almost every attack, like 89% of attacks or so involve a username password being phished. That's a crazy number, right? My answer to that is not, let's train the user not to give out a password, because they will, all the time. But we should make it a strong authentication, for example. There's a couple of things we do need to train employees on. And that is, especially with AI, that's getting, I mean, you can now have a video call with your colleague that isn't really your colleague, right? And that actually, it's not a fairy tale or anything. You can do it yourself. That means that you have to have some kind of procedure in place transferring money that involves a 4 eyes principle. There are organizations that don't have it. I get phone calls all the time. Lieuwe, we just lost 100,000 euros because we sent it to some kind of offshore bank account, and that wasn't supposed to be because, yeah, it was really convincing. And this time it needs to go to this bank account, do this for me. There need to be procedures in place, and those need to be trained. I'm really an advocate of that. Clicking a link, you assume that your users will click those links, and you have to be resilient against it.
So to add to that is, I cannot wire any money within the company, because every day, all day, you talk to our finance team, they get emails from me, supposedly, to do exactly that. So if you get a request from me wiring money, anybody, AMS-IX, don't. Right?
Yeah.
Because
Don't ask him for a raise as well.
No, exactly.
It will not be
Let's have that discussion over beer. But no, but it is. So it's happening. It's really happening every day, and luckily our teams are focused on it as well because we know it's happening. But yeah, it's just that zero trust thing again, right? It's not when or not if, but when it happens, and then how do you respond?
Can we fight this as private industry alone, or do we need the help of the government?
I think it's always a collaboration. For sure, the government itself cannot. The government can make all kinds of rules, of course, and that helps. I also think it's a matter of investing in the right spots. I do think that everybody who owns a system or who owns data is primarily responsible for making it available, but there needs to be some kind of orchestration, especially if you're thinking about geopolitical things. I mean, we as a country should be resilient. We can see how Ukraine is quite good at this, and there's no way you can do this, any organization can do this alone. So, I mean, I can make my own infrastructure as secure as possible, but I rely on the infrastructure that AMS-IX delivers in order to connect to the world. So that also needs to be resilient. And then, of course, the government also has a completely different task in this. I'm talking a lot about resilience and making sure that people don't get in, can bring down systems, can't use our solar panels in the country to switch them on, switch them off, etc. But there's also warfare. It's a completely different ballgame. And also misinformation, for example, completely different ballgame. Has not a lot to do with cybersecurity, if you ask me.
Yeah, so we do. And Bert Hubert, many of you know him, he made this great argument where he said, well, a lot of these things are initially left to the market. Right? So the market is then coming up with all these solutions and technology and ways of working to deal with issues like this. But quite often, the market itself is sort of incapable of regulating itself, or because of competition or other reasons, being able to figure it out for everybody within the market. And often, that's when the government has to step in and start regulating. Right? And we're seeing that now. We're seeing that, for example, also in regulation around good products. So in Europe, we have this CE certification, for example. Right, and it's not, again, it's one of the means we have to try and deal with this. But many of all of us have equipment in house, whether it's your thermostat or a camera or your doorbell or whatever, right? That you didn't think about when you plugged it in and connected it to your network. Well, some of you may have, but most of us haven't, right? Because again, as a consumer, there should also be an element of trust. There's that word again. That whatever you buy and connect is safe, or is, somebody looked at it and made sure that it is safe. And quite often, it isn't. So it's not well protected, it's easy to hack, and it's connected to your network. So if you can hack the thing, you can hack the network, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where governments come in and start to regulate, because the market is not dealing with it, and sometimes, of course, the regulation comes first. And I touched on it a little bit earlier in the scenarios, right? So in Europe, we have a lot of that, and some other parts of the world look at that and go, well, you're putting yourself out of business because you're putting too much regulation in. So it's always a happy medium as well how to do that. And you personally, right, on behalf of AMS-IX, but also sort of as a personal quest, are involved in also helping the government come up with good regulation. So it's not just that there needs to be a rule, you need to do this, that, or the other, but also how do you then implement that? And I think with NIS2, for example, we're a year late in the Netherlands, but we're seeing that the authority that needs to check that, the RDI in the Netherlands, the Rijksdienst voor Infrastructuur, they are open to think about, so how can we leverage, for example, your ISO certification and take that as the first step to see how you've organized your security, for example. Right? So it's also about it being applicable, because if it's not doable, if you as a company are only busy with trying to apply by the rules, also not good. So yes, long answer, even longer. We need to work together with governments, but we also need to figure out how that's a good medium, and it's not stifling growth, but also not making it unsafe in this particular topic.
And the government is doing a lot, huh? I mean, our big area, I think, is exchanging indicators, especially if there are so indicators. What I mean is bad acting IPs and all those. I mean, somehow this has become a business model for many organizations. I think that's a really bad thing. I mean, a ban on that would be nice, because then it's level playing field for all the commercial parties again. But the government is doing a lot with all their NCSC, for example. I mean, know that the Dutch NCSC is really on the forefront worldwide. For example, in when the Log4j happened, they led the world into making sure that we kind of got it under control. Cyber diplomacy has been invented almost in the Netherlands. So the government in the Netherlands, we can be proud of them. And there's more and more initiatives with private parties to do exchange IOCs and all that. And I think that's a crucial thing to do, because the bad guys do work together, I can tell you.
Yeah, you mentioned the IP addresses. Is that something that Onto-It shares?
Yeah, certainly. We anybody can get feeds from us. Yeah. And there's a lot available online, by the way, by the Dutch government again. NCSC does this, but there's a lot in the public domain. We call this OS-int, and one of the branches of this is blacklists of IP addresses, domain names, signatures, and all that.
Shadow Server also has a feed for whom you can subscribe if you have your own AS number, so you get all the vulnerabilities within your AS number.
There's a lot to do. It's just that almost nobody applies it in a preventive way. Because if you have those IOCs, what we see a lot is that the Security Operations Center then looks at log files everywhere, and then, hey, we have an IP, hey, there's an IP, and this is Russian, and this is associated with this attacking group. And then, now we know we are in trouble. And it's so easy to simply make your firewall configured in such a way that it's constantly updating those IPs, and have the first rule, block anyone and any IP from this blacklist to me, block it. And everybody should do this. We don't see it a lot. All our customers get it immediately, but it's almost never there.
Yeah, another big conversation we have in the Netherlands is, of course, sovereignty. Can you shed any light on this? What would be AMS-IX's stance in this?
Well, now it's my question to ask how long do we have. But no, so
see your drinks.
Yeah, exactly. No, so the difficulty with it is that it's sorry for my rudeness maybe, but it's a little bit of a bullshit bingo game as well if we're not careful, right? So all of a sudden sovereignty is a big thing, also for the Dutch government, European governments, and but it is. Funnily enough, and I think if we take anything positive from the last couple of months and the geopolitical developments, is that I think there is a lot of people have woken up to the fact that we should really think about this, and we as AMS-IX, we were invited to the parliament and talk about this as well, and of course we were asked to also, so what do we think sovereignty is, and as AMS-IX we believe it's the ability to have a choice, the power to make your own decision where you want to put stuff or how you want to deal with information, for example, etc. And that's true in the digital space, but I think that's true on any level when you talk about sovereignty. So having that independence is important. Now, what I'm also seeing happening a lot is that, we should get rid of Microsoft, or let's not work with the Americans again, or whatever. It's not going to happen, right? It's impossible to make that happen right now. We are depending on them, both militarily in the NATO, but also when it comes to our space, the hyperscalers, we can just not do without. Having said that, there is still, I think, the obligation for all of us, like you have to tune your firewalls and use the information that is out there, to think about, so what is my intellectual property? What's my DNA? What is really important to me as an organization, whether you're a company or a government or a school or a hospital, and think about how do I protect those crown jewels? And is it okay for me to put that, many of the engineers for a long time had a t-shirt and they thought it was really funny, the cloud is somebody else's computer, right? But it is, and they are right? So do you put your data on somebody else's computer, right? Do you give somebody else the keys to your house? Or your bank pass or something, right? And typically you don't. So the same is now, luckily, that realization is starting to happen. And I think sovereignty is a lot about that. So where do you put your critical assets? How do you protect them? How do you keep them safe? And then it's still fine to work with hyperscalers as well, but maybe not putting everything there. And we've seen a very specific case here in the Netherlands, where also when you talk about governments and organizations working together, where one of the also vital infrastructure companies chose to use AWS. And this whole discussion blew up in everybody's face. So why did they? And it's part of vital infrastructure, etc. But then when you start to analyze that case, it's actually quite nuanced. And there was very good reason for them to choose AWS. One of them being it was much safer than some of the solutions they looked at as an alternative, right? So again, it's quite nuanced. But my recommendation, and as AMS-IX, would be, well, sovereignty is about having that option to choose and not be held ransom because somebody has that power over you when it comes to your critical assets.
Is that something your customers also ask for?
More than before, certainly, especially in the recent shift in geopolitics that's now really apparent to people. Bear-to-bear, that you mentioned before, of course, a good asset. I get a lot of questions about Arjen Lubach episode recently on this subject. I think there's two things that we should really be aware of. One is the fact that we host the location of the data isn't really the thing we're talking about. Because if you are in a European Azure, for example, the Americans still control it. And the point is, with the example you just mentioned with the AWS, I think you're referring to the Sidon, huh? At least I had a similar discussion there. It really depends on which kind of data you want to put in there. So it's an attribute of the data that you're protecting, and that's where Zero Trust comes in. Zero Trust makes you focus on an application, on a piece of data, on this particular database or system. And an attribute of that system should be, where can the data be? And having it in a European, well, we've seen the court in The Hague where there was someone disconnected from its Microsoft account. There's some debate on this, but it's quite clear that because he was quite negative about certain people in the White House, one in particular, he got disconnected. There's no direct proof of this, but it's certainly possible, and you should think if you are a person like that, a key person like, do I host my email there, or do I do it somewhere else? It's now in Switzerland, by the way, this particular mailbox. So data locality there is, like you say, it's a choice. It should be a choice, and it's often not. And one major reason, by the way, is that if you are from school now and you want to run a database or an email box, you are taught by Microsoft that it should be in Azure, and people don't know how to install a database anymore. I don't know if there's people here who know to install a database. And without Azure? Yeah, but a few. Well, technical audience, in a sense, but this is changing. So it's hard, right? That's thing one. Thing two.
And before you go to two, and the alternative, if it's not Microsoft, is then to go to Google.
Yeah, or Amazon. Indeed. And we all somehow have the idea that we are not going to go to do this in Alibaba's cloud, right?
No.
We may have the little cloud in a while, and maybe that's the thing. But if you ask someone in the United States, hey, we have Alibaba, it's hosted in San Francisco in their data center, shall we put your data in there? No way. That's what they say, right? And we are not doing this. And I'm not saying we should always do this. I mean, there's great products coming out of Silicon Valley, but it should be indeed an option, and you should be really conscious about it. Second item is about encryption. You say someone else's computer, those computers have hard drives. Encryption is not a way to conceal your data from someone. it is to conceal your data from someone for the foreseeable future. With quantum on the edge, I mean, there's lots of debate when it will happen, of course, we don't know. It's a bit like predicting AI's future. But at some point, your data that is in those clouds can be decrypted. So there currently are other governments that are collecting data in an encrypted form. They can see it, they can do nothing with it, but in a couple of years, or maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 40 years, I don't know, that will be possible. So one thing is, today you need to have encryption algorithms that are quantum safe already, as far as something like that really exists. Time will tell. But remember that even if you do something encrypted, it doesn't necessarily mean that nobody's going to look at it ever, right? So, and that should be part of that equation, I think.
Yeah, the IVD has a recommendation to use post-quantum encryption algorithms.
Yeah, we should do it today.
So it's available on the website in English, and it's really good. Yeah. If we look at resilience, how does resilience tie in with security, with sovereignty?
Yeah, so again, there's that word again. I think to some extent it's a matter of perspective, right? So if we're not careful, we do a lot of scaremongering, and we're all nobody wants to go online anymore or leave the house, and then I left an hour early this morning because I didn't want to be stuck in a traffic jam.
Very resilient behavior.
Well, but why I'm saying that is that when I look to the Netherlands specifically, right, it's if I want to go out for dinner, I need to reserve 6 weeks ahead. Hotels are full, whatever. So, is it all that bad? So I think part of resilience is also that, being able to deal with the fact that there is uncertainty, and basically live with that. And we're living in a time where every minute of the day we are bombarded with news, whether it's good or bad. So yesterday, when there was this whole debacle about the Dutch parliament or the government, there were all these live blogs where minute by minute, because everybody was, this minister said that, and there was do I need that, or do I just need to know the cabinet fell, and right? So it's also a choice how much of this you want to take with you. So that's one. The other thing is resilience is also about being able and have some comfort in your ability to respond. So we talked a lot still about prevention and zero trust, but I think a large part that I think needs more attention is how do you respond. So if it happens, then what? So we learned, for example, in talking to other parts of the vital infrastructure in the Netherlands, that there's this thing called a satellite phone. It's only been around for 30 years or so, but there's the satellite phone. It uses a different network than GSM, right, or the mobile network. And they have those in place in case there is a power outage or something, and they want to still communicate with each other. But they also found that all the phone numbers are in your normal phone, and then when you want to call somebody on their satellite phone, that's a different number. Do you actually have that number? So you may have the phone, but if you don't know the phone number, who do you call and how do you call them, right? So a very simple, basic thing in organizing actually communication. So I said, you know what? We'll put that in Teams somewhere or in the cloud. Well, hang on, there was a power outage. So how do I actually get to the cloud to look up the number? So it's very practical, old school things. So actually, Leo being on stage with a piece of paper is not just about security. Sometimes that's what you need in actually to be resilient and be able to respond. So that's an important part. And then the final, because adding to the mobile phone thing, all of you have heard about the power outage in Spain, right? And everybody I talked to that was there, the one thing that all of them say is 2 hours in, I couldn't make a phone call anymore. So my phone was charged, but I lost the signal because all the cell towers basically went dead because the batteries at the bottom of the cell towers were empty. So all of a sudden, nobody could make a phone call anymore. So it's real, right? So resilience, this is just an example to explain that resilience is also about being prepared and practice when things go wrong, right? The fire department is very resilient because they practice all the time for any eventuality. And I think that's where all of us can do a lot more in also being prepared if something bad happens.
Thank you. Let's do a question from the audience, if there are any.
Yes. I will just speak up, because
Yep.
I have enough volume here. You mentioned the outage in Spain. What would happen data in data centers, when the data centers will keep up and running. This
Yep.
is where we prepare. But what will happen in the chain of the communication when, for example, data center in the Hague area needs to send data to Amsterdam?
Yeah.
How will it look like?
So, of course, the Dutch power companies were very quick to say, oh, this is not going to happen in the Netherlands because different structure and different infrastructure, etc.
I survived an Apache flying into... our office was right next to it, so we didn't have power for 3 days. That was fun.
Yeah. No, but back to the question, what if we have a situation like that, what happens? And the honest answer is, I don't know. But I do know that specifically the data centers, of course, have a lot of resilience. Here you go again, and a lot of procedures to deal with that, right? So first of all, there's batteries, there's generators. They have contracts with oil suppliers to make sure they can keep the generators going. But if it's one data center, it's one thing. But again, if you think of the Spanish situation, and if all of the data centers all of a sudden call the oil company and go, hey, I need an extra truckload of oil, then does the oil company actually have the capacity to keep all the trucks going to... And actually, can the trucks go? Because if all the traffic lights are out, traffic jams, etc. So then it starts to become a cascading thing. And of course, this is sort of the worst case scenario that you can imagine. But I think within the networks of the data centers, but also as we see within vital infrastructure in the power grid, there is a lot of resilience and there's a lot of that testing happening, what if? So the honest answer is I don't know, but I do see a lot of work being done in keeping the lights on, preferably in.
You can't really test this, huh?
No, it's very difficult to do, but I'm maybe naively optimistic that there is a lot of that testing happening to try and prevent something like that happening.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lieuwe.
Actually,
For the Spain situation, I think Amadeo is giving a presentation later today. So if you have questions specifically about Spain, please ask him to him.
before
you.
we go to any more questions, I have one through Mentimeter. Actually, we have a couple, but we only have time for one. So a question that came in quite early on already. In what way do AMS-IX and On2IT cooperate or work together?
Yeah, so I think there's two major things we currently do, and there's a couple of ideas we have towards the future. So the one thing, and Lieuwe already touched on, is Threat Talks. It's a podcast series where we invite all kinds of guest speakers to talk about threats, but not in the classical sense. So not, oh, you have this bug in an application and what does it do, but also about things like policy, how to deal with it, and basically it's a little bit like this. It's a talk like this on a particular topic. And that's quite successful. So that's one of the things we do to just bring knowledge to the market and experience to the market that you can hopefully use to improve your own situation. The other thing we do, we literally work together. So we take some of the services of On2IT to help us stay safe, and we offer services to them. Things we're thinking about going forward is much more in this threat intel type service. Can we share more of the things we are seeing that can help you improve, configure your equipment, your fabric better, so you're better protected, basically. So those are 2 or 3 things. Not sure you want to add anything?
Yeah. Now you can imagine that if AMS-IX has a really big view on what's happening in the world on traffic-wise, and we have a really in-depth view in what's actually happening in attacks that arrive at our joint customers.
Cool. And we are out of time.
Okay.
We're running over time, actually, so I would like
Come find us during the coffee break.
I just wanted to say that if you have more questions, please find them during the coffee break. You will be here all day, I guess. Well, Peter, definitely, you have to. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, one of those loud applauses. Thank you very much.